The following is a special presentation presented by Relyance Bank.
Let's go to the commissioner.
With the second choice in the draft, the San Diego Chargers select quarterback, Washington State University, Brian Leaf.
Hello Ram fans, and thank you for tuning in to today's special presentation. Here with us today is a very special guest with a unique story. He was a collegiate star quarterback who became a lottery pick in the draft that would later go on to face struggles with drug addiction. Now he has dedicated his life to helping others battle their own issues with addiction. At this time, I'd like to welcome Mr. Ryan Leaf to the set. Mr. Leaf, thank you for sitting down with us today.
You bet, bud.
You've had a very illustrious career in football, ranging from Pasadena to the draft to the NFL. Well, let's go back to the beginning. It's 1992, you're in Montana, you just won the state championship with your alma mater, Charles M. Russell. You know, you're starting to gain national attention. What is that like to be gaining that attention at such a young age?
Well, it's wonderful to be getting a lot of that attention for what you do as an athlete, but it also, for me, probably gave me a lot more self-importance that I deserved. Though I had always wanted to be a professional athlete, whatever that looked like. So it was exciting to win the state championship, and I was looking forward to whatever had to come to play the next few years.
So what was the recruiting process like for you?
Well, I got recruited by everybody, so it was pretty neat to be, I guess, wooed in that way to play football. It all kind of came down to who I felt most comfortable with, and Coach Price and the Washington State Cougars were the one, and it was probably the best decision I made.
Are there any other front runners maybe?
Yeah, Colorado was in the running. University of Miami was in the running. So I was just a country boy from Montana. I wasn't gonna do well in South Beach, Florida, I don't think. So I made my visit down there and really felt like a fish out of water for sure.
So were you always certain you wanted to play quarterback?
Yeah, I was always a quarterback. I like playing. I played a little bit of safety in high school too, but the quarterback was the position. He was the leader. He was the guy with the ball in his hand on every play. My dad was a quarterback, and those were my heroes were Terry Bradshaw, Troy Aikman, guys like that. So that's who I wanted to be, and you know, there were people who tried to get in my way to play, but I was always the one that went it out.
So looking back on your career in high school as a whole, how would you say that's impacted your life and your career later on?
Well, I think that it prepares you a lot. I think football is a great sport where it brings people together, teaches you about leadership and who you're going to become. I think it also builds up a lot of entitlement too, because you are placed on a pedestal for what you do. And I think a lot of times people forget that just because you're a great football player doesn't necessarily make you a good person. And you really have to build that foundation first. And I didn't figure that out for a long, long time because of the importance I placed on who I was as an athlete rather than just a human being.
So let's go ahead and go to, you've signed to go to Washington State, you get there. What is it like, the difference between high school football and college football?
It's pretty significant, especially from Montana to the Pac-10. Though I caught on pretty well. I was talented enough where I could compete. I worked really, really hard, and college was pretty significant for me in the fact that I learned an offense. I got to stay in that offense for 4 years. And when that final season came around, I was head and shoulders above everybody because not only my preparation, my hard work, but my talent level, and we were able to compete and win that season and do something that Washington State hadn't done for 67 years.
So let's talk about that 1997 season. You were a final for the Heisman. You led the school to one of 4 conference championships in school history, as of right now, 3rd at the time. You know, what was that like, playing in the Rose Bowl, getting all that attention?
It was a dream come true, for sure. I mean, that's the day I decided to go to Washington State. Coach Price had called me, and I was watching the Rose Bowl. It was Wisconsin and UCLA, and he said, "I'll make you a deal. If you come here and play with us, we'll play in that game together." And it was like, you know, it was an accumulation of a dream that we had both had together, and we worked really hard for. And we had a great football team, a ton of great players around us. As a coach and a quarterback, and we took advantage of it all and got the greatest opportunity in the world, and that's to play in a Rose Bowl. It's the granddaddy of them all.
So we look at following college, you get into the draft process, and it was the front runner between you and Peyton Manning. You know, with Peyton, have you developed a special relationship with him?
Yeah, we did because of course, of being compared to each other that whole, really the last 2 college seasons, and then going into the draft being compared to as who was better, and so you develop a friendship there, and he's such a solid individual as a human being that you really can't, if there's anybody I would be resentful of, it would be him maybe because of his successes, but he worked really hard, and I was probably more talented than him coming out of college. It's proof that at that level everybody's talented. It's what you do with what you have between Sunday and Sunday, and he took advantage of every single opportunity, whereas I simply didn't.
So over the years, have you sustained a relationship with Peyton?
He did. He reached out to me while I was in prison, and I've stayed in contact with him since, about one thing or the other. I'm hoping to get a golf game in soon with him. I think we'd probably be pretty competitive against one another.
Okay. So it's finally draft day. You're there at the theater at Madison Square Garden. Your name gets called. You go up on the stage. What is that like? You know, so many people dream of being drafted. What did that mean to you?
It was a special day. It's my favorite professional moment of my life, for sure. And my whole family was there. My grandparents, my aunts and uncles, my brothers. So I got to experience it with all of them. And it is the accumulation of all you've ever dreamed of. And that day when it happens, to be up on that stage, to have your name called, to be next to the commissioner holding up your jersey. So I relished that day, and like I said, it's to this day, it's the best professional football day of my life.
So how was that first little bit there in the NFL? What was that like getting ready to transition into the NFL and the process?
It was a whirlwind. You know, you are. It becomes a job. It's about marketing and it's about entertainment, also about preparation. And I wasn't necessarily prepared for what was about to happen. And then the money comes into play too. All of a sudden you go from bouncing a check to Pizza Hut in college for $13 to having $31 million at your disposal when you're 21 years old. So it's a significant change, and one I certainly wasn't prepared for. When it came to football, I could do that well, and I was just waiting for that to present itself. And when it did, we did pretty well early on. But then when adversity hit, with all the scrutiny that came with it and the media attention, I simply didn't know how to handle it. Every player you meet in the professional ranks are the university's best player. And it's like when you played Michigan, you had Charles Woodson on the other side, but when you got to the pros, you had 4 Charles Woodsons out there. You know, you could always find a loophole or find a weakness in the defense in college, but when you got to the NFL, they were the best players in the world. You had guys who at 300 pounds could run you down, when in college you could simply get outside the pocket and make a play. So you had to figure out and develop a different method of performing, and if you're not up for it, your career can be very, very short-lived in the NFL.
So at the end of your NFL career, when did you finally decide that maybe this is the time for me to go? Was there a specific moment in your career where you thought maybe it's time for me to leave?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was in Seattle, and I was sick and tired of being beat up physically and particularly emotionally and critically by the media and fans, and I hadn't lived up to my expectations, and I felt like a disappointment, and I just thought if I could just go away and disappear, everything would be fine. That's never the case. You always have to confront everything up front when you're dealing with failure and things like that. So, but that was the time. I remember going into camp in Seattle and going, I'm not going to be the starter, and my pride wouldn't let me be a backup. So I just said, I'm done with this.
What would you give other young people that may be facing similar attention in the media? What advice would you give to them?
Well, the best piece of advice I could give them is an affirmation I use on a daily basis, and that's what other people think of me is none of my business. I think that's would be very helpful. It's taken me a long time to get to that point where I can actually say it and believe it. But I think as a football player and a narcissistic football player, I always was worried about what other people thought of me. Not necessarily good or bad, I just needed people noticing me and thinking about me, and that's a recipe for disaster.
So, following your career came the issues with the drugs and the law. You know, when did this really start? What was the origin of the issue?
Well, I was the issue, so it was always me. It stems back to when I was probably 13 years old is when the problem was. I tell people when I talk in my speeches that I was a drug addict long before I ever took a drug, and how I behaved. I was fearful, I was angry, I was judgmental. That's the behaviors of an addict, and I exhibited those early on in life. So and I believe competition was my addiction forever. And when I decided to retire from football, that means competition goes away. And I replaced it with Vicodin, which is the only drug I've ever taken in my life, but it was one I had been introduced to because of all my injuries playing football. And it's an opiate painkiller, and it did its job. I was emotionally in pain, and it removed those. And I didn't feel judgment of others when I was in rooms, and it worked. But it only works for a short period of time because you need more and more and more, and then you start chasing it and chasing it and chasing it until your life just simply spirals out of control.
What would you say was really the low point of your experience with drug addiction?
Ending up in a prison cell, contemplating and attempting to take your own life. I mean, somebody who wanted to be a professional athlete and this young, innocent kid from a small town in Montana to be in a place where you wake up in a prison cell and spend 32 months there, it's rather significantly life-altering. And if you don't make a conscious choice to change, it's most likely going to end up in a grave.
When would you say was your real aha moment, realizing I need help?
Well, I think I don't know if there is actually one. I think that in my case that I needed intervention in a humbling in a way that other people didn't, and mine was I had to be intervened with, and since I wouldn't listen to anybody else, the sheriff's department ended up being the one to intervene and saving me. And then while in prison, being humbled and realizing that I was more than just a number that this judge had placed on me, but I actually had value. But to have value and be important, there had to be a significant lifestyle change on my part.
Were there any people that helped you along your way in your recovery process?
Yeah, especially in prison. There was a young man who was an Afghan war vet, and he got on me one day about my inability to get my head out of the sand and how I didn't understand my value, not only to the men in there, but for when I got out, because he said, "You're going to get out at some point, Ryan." So he asked me to come with him to down to the prison library and help guys who didn't know how to read. And it was the first time I'd ever been of service to anybody. So at the time, I didn't know how significant a moment it was. I do now. I see it now, and how he played a huge part in it. And he's a big inspiration for me.
Have you heard from him recently?
Yeah, we in fact, I was just walking down the hall here, and he texted me. So he was reading off his test scores or his grades. He's in college right now, trying to be an engineer, and he was reading off his grades to me on the text message. So it's awesome to see him living his life too. Like I said, he's just a giant inspiration, helped me a ton.
So, following your own struggles with addiction, you started to help other people with their own addictions and their own issues. How are you doing that? What mediums are you using?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's just substance abuse related. I think for me, the substance of abuse was a coping mechanism. It was the way I was living wasn't the right way. So for me, it's about reaching people who are just human beings and telling my story. I'm not trying to wag my finger at somebody and say, don't do this, don't do that, but actually just have an open dialogue and conversation with them about why they're doing something. Understand why you were doing something, and most likely it's because you need to alter your mood for some reason. And I got involved with that after I got out of treatment, after I got out of prison in the California area with a company called Transcend Recovery Community, and they've just been so supportive in helping, mature this ability of mine to reach a large number of people. Who would have thought? Because I just got out of prison December 3rd, 2014, and that's almost just over 2.5 years, and who would have thought I'd be in Hot Springs, Arkansas, where I've never been in Arkansas my whole life, speaking to a group of people about my story and trying to help raise funds for a local community football program, and I mean that's a significant lifestyle change for sure.
So what advice would you give to other young people who may be going through similar issues? Maybe even here at Lakeside.
Right. My biggest thing I say, especially to athletes, and football in particular, I tell them just because you're a great football player doesn't make you a good person. You have to build that foundation first. Everything else will follow, because I find that a ton of people get tied up in the fact that they're a good football player, which isn't good. It brings communities together, it brings people together, but football should be a tool that brings us together, then where we can have actual true conversations about what's going on. And I think it does that, but I think the self-importance that comes with it, especially now with the social media and everything like that, we really think we're more important than we are, when we're just like everybody else. We're just another flawed human being trying to be better on a daily basis. And so that's where I start with my story, and I kind of tell them mine and show them how I got to that point, and hopefully it has an impact on one person who may be struggling or be in a place where I was and not have to go to that place that I did.
So if you could sit down today and across the table from you was the Ryan Leaf in high school, what would you tell him?
I did this recently. I wrote an article for the Players Tribune, and so I tell them what's about to happen, but I'd also tell them that, don't worry kid, it's going to be okay, but you need to fall on your face a bunch, and that's just how it's going to have to be. Because it's kind of a tricky question for me, because if I don't go through all of that, I'm not the guy that's sitting across from me right now being able to talk like this. And I'm essentially a guy that was a good football player and a terrible person, is what it would have been. So the average length of an NFL career is 2.8 years. People don't realize that. You think you're going to be that person the rest of your life, and some just have to be humbled in a different way.
So if you could have changed one thing, would you have changed anything if you had the choice about your life?
No, not one thing.
You've had many achievements over your career, but how do you want to be remembered? What do you want your legacy to be once you're gone?
I think that ties into the self-importance thing too. I don't know if I necessarily want a legacy. I just want to be known as, what I would like to be known as, an honest man. Because recently my brother asked my fiance why she wanted to marry me, and she said, Ryan's the most honest man I've ever met. And my brother just fell over laughing, because that is not a definition of who he knew for 35 years. So that would probably be the way I want to be remembered, is an honest man who tried to be of help. But quite honestly, I don't necessarily need to be remembered. I can hopefully be okay with that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lee, for sitting down with us today, and good luck on your journey to helping others.
Thank you very much, Chris.